Tonight we're taking a look at the latest NHL trade rumors focusing on teams like the Canucks and the Lightning. We're also going to examine the remaining key players on the UFA market that still remain unsigned, and we have a couple more signings as well. A couple more RFAs have come to terms. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of things to talk about today. Before we jump into the latest UFA as well as trade rumors, we'll take a look at a couple quick signings that were just announced here in the last little bit. We have the Ottawa Senators coming to terms with restricted free agent forwards Beaudet, who signs a one-year, two-way contract. We'll pay him $700,000 at the NHL level and $70,000 at the AHL level. He got into 22 games last year with the Senators, mostly in fourth-line duty. He was okay. To be honest, I'm not sure he has a super long future with the team, given many of their younger prospects will soon pass him on the depth chart. But he's kind of playing a little bit of a placeholder with them for the most part when he's been up in the lineup, just due to the fact that they kind of prefer to keep some of their other prospects, focusing on other things in Belleville last year. So we'll see what happens, but ultimately he stays around and probably splits the time between both clubs next year. Now, the other signing we had tonight was the Avalanche coming to terms with Tyson Jose on a one-year contract. Ultimately, he ended up accepting his qualifying offer that he was given by the franchise, which pays him just shy of $875,000. So he will be an RFA again in a year's time. It's a one-year, one-way deal. So ultimately, he stays with the Avalanche here on a pretty cheap contract. We'll see if he can get a little bit more development next year. He's been a player who was drafted with a lot of potential, a lot of it yet to be unrealized. There's been a lot of talk around him and his future with the team as well, given how deep they are at the forward position, as well as how many other prospects are kind of coming up the ranks behind him as well. So wouldn't be shocking me if he's a player that's moved here sometime in the near future, but it looks like he'll stick around for at least one more year in Colorado. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of trade and free agent rumors I want to take a look at today. We still have a lot of unsigned players, but two teams that are still kind of heavily involved in the trade market, or at least that are expected to be making deals somewhat of a bit of a necessity, are the Canucks and the Lightning. Now, starting with the Vancouver Canucks, there's a variety of things that they are currently looking at. They really want to add ideally a top six, if not a middle six winger. That could be done either via free agency or trade. They have different options that they could consider, and they likely do want to add another veteran defenseman, probably somebody who would come in fairly on the cheap here, somebody who can be like a number 6-7 kind of guy. Basically, has a bit of an insurance policy. They do have some younger defensemen who could certainly grab those types of roles, and will certainly fight for spots on the full-time roster. Guys like Levy and Rathbone, are prime examples of that. No guarantee they make the team next year, but they'll certainly stand a much better chance when you have departures like Stetcher and Tanev. Of course, Nate Schmidt comes in, but they didn't replace everybody who went out, so it certainly makes some room for some youth, and also helps with their salary cap as well when it's somebody on an entry-level deal, kind of leveling out the financial side of things here as well. But clearly, from a cap standpoint, they'd have just shy of $2 million in salary cap space, and they need to sign Jake Virtanen and Adam Beaudet. Now, most feel that the contract for Virtanen is going to come in somewhere around $3 million. I would imagine that the Canucks are trying hard to avoid an arbitration hearing. Maybe they're trying to push the fact that they're hoping he'll sign for a little bit under $3, but many feel if it goes as far as arbitration, he's probably going to get awarded somewhere around 3, 3.1, 3.2, something to that nature, and the Canucks would have the option to sign him for 1 or 2 years. I would assume they'd probably accept the one-year deal, but difficult to say for sure. But after those two guys are signed, that's either going to put them over the cap or, likely just not going to have any other room to add anybody else. So what are they looking at for options? Well, they have a variety of things they could consider. Obviously, they could make a trade. They could obviously have a few contracts buried in the minors. One of the big ones that's heavily debated on what to do with is forward Loui Eriksson, who still has that $6 million contract, which is a bit of an albatross around the Canucks. Some wondered if he would be bought out this year. Could he be traded? And I think it's remotely possible he could be traded, but at this point, I think it's pretty unlikely. I would think that a lot of teams right now are so tight up against the cap, and they've made so many moves between trades and free agency already, that if there was an option to move Eriksson, that it more than likely would have happened already. So you can never say never, of course, but there's a pretty good possibility that ship has sailed. It might no longer be the possibility here. If you take a look at buying out the contract, it's probably not going to happen either, at least not yet. Maybe next year But if you look at capfriendly.com, and I'll give you a quick snapshot here of what the buyout calculator would look like, they would save hardly any money this year. They'd only save about $300,000 in cap space for the coming year, but the year after there'd be much more savings as well over $2 million. Then they'd have an extra 2 years tagged on with a bit of dead space, which really is not going to be good when they have big contracts coming due for guys like Hughes and Pettersson. So to me, Loui Eriksson does not get bought out this year, just does not make financial sense at this time. But if they wait and can do it next year, if they cannot find a trade for him first, of course, then at that point they would get a bigger savings next year and only have 1 year of dead space afterwards. They'd only have him on the books for 2 years instead of 4, which just is a lot more realistic here. But for right now, they will likely are continuing to always find a trade for him. They're giving his agent permission as well to scour the league and find a new home for him. But if it all comes down to it and they cannot do that, they can bury him in the minors and get $1 million of relief. Now, the same can be done for a player like Sven Berchi, who very well could be bought out, but again, probably not likely. But they could get enough relief between those two players to get an extra $2 million in cap space, which will certainly go a long way to at least getting their current RFA signed without being over the cap, so they wouldn't be in a situation where they weren't cap compliant. Then at that point, like I said, they'd like to add another 1 or 2 players, but at least they have more flexibility in that regard. But since they do have a player who filed for arbitration, they will get another buyout window that will open up for them once that's all said and done, and they could very well look to buy out Brandon Sutter. I mean, I'm sure there might be some other contracts that might make more sense, but if you look at the Sutter contract, he's down to 1 year in this deal, and they actually get a fair bit of over $2 million in cap relief. So that would make more sense at this time than going to try to do like an Eriksson buyout, for example. So they have a variety of things they're looking at here, and it's difficult to say exactly where they go. But there's a lot of players here on the open market that very well could come in through free agency, or they could make a trade. They really shore up that extra winger that they're looking to add. I mean, there was talks. They talked to Mike Hoffman. Hoffman apparently was basically told we need to move some money out first, and he appears to be in a bit of a holding pattern, kind of waiting to see who's going to kind of up the ante here for his services. So I think that's pretty unlikely that they're going to sign a player quite of that magnitude, to be honest. But they very well could end up trading a player like a Jake Virtanen or an Adam Beaudet as well. Just because they need new contracts doesn't mean that it's a given that they will not be traded. There are 2 players that have been in and out of the rumor mill off and on, Virtanen mostly as well, so that's quite a possibility too. So, and they also have a lot of interesting prospects that many other teams do find intriguing. So the Canucks basically at this point looking to add a winger, ideally an extra depth defenseman as well, and they could go doing that in a variety of ways depending on how their salary cap situation stands once they get those contracts looked after and potentially a player or 2 buried in the minors. Now, when it comes to the Lightning, they're in a pretty unique situation as well. The teams are really, like I mentioned before, not overly kind to help them out here. They can't find anybody to take Tyler Johnson off their hands, and they're going to have to end up offering something significant as a sweetener to make that happen. But the latest report in the Athletic talking about their situation now from Joe Smith indicates that there is a lot of players that I'm surprised to hear have not been asked about waiving their no trades. It says that they're really reluctant to trade Alex Killorn due to the leadership he provides and obviously strong play as well, and that they have not asked Braden Coburn, even though other people had reported that he was asked. He's saying that he was not asked to waive his no trade, and same goes for Yanni Gourde or Andre Palat, and they mentioned Palat as a player that they really wouldn't want to move, and I understand why, especially with the current lineup and how it's been put together here. He's played a lot on the top line, so I understand why they wouldn't want to move Palat. But at the end of the day, they've got to move somebody, and they have all these players with no trade clauses that they've given out way too easily, and now you've got all these players that they have not asked to be traded. So the question boils down to who's going to end up going for the Lightning. Are they going to trade one of their RFAs instead? I mean, you have to wonder here. You'd think that a guy like Sergachev is probably looking for a contract. I'm going to assume somewhere is at least $5 million, maybe a bit more, 5.5 perhaps. You got a guy like Anthony Cirelli, probably close to $4 million. And we're talking short-term deals here as well. It would make sense in today's market for them to take bridge deals if they can get it, because the long-term deals are not going to be as lucrative as they once were. So you're probably looking at 2 to 3 year deals. Like I said, $5.5 million for Sergachev. You're probably looking at about 4 or so for Cirelli. Eric Chernak, you might be able to get him maybe 2.5, 2.75, something to that effect. But still, you add all that up, that's a fair bit of money. So ideally, they need to shed about $10 million in salary cap space. So it's going to take Tyler Johnson and another comparable contract of $5 million to make a necessary space. So if they have all these players who they're apparently saying they have not asked to be waived for their no trade, then the question boils down to who's going to go. They just don't have a lot of options of players they can trade that don't have that kicked in yet. One player will be Braden Point, but they're certainly not going to trade Braden Point. You get Andrei Vasilevsky, $9.5 million, top goalie, one of the top goalies in the NHL. Like, he's not going anywhere. There was rumblings that they asked Steven Stamkos, but apparently that didn't go very far. And however that went around it, Pierre LeBrun, for example, saying there's a lot of secrecy around it, but he's obviously recovering from injury. And as much as he's a great player, he's had so many health issues and so much, injuries, and that's a big contract. Most teams can't take that on anyway. So they're in an awkward predicament here. And obviously it really boils down to, this is more of a rumor about who they're not looking to trade, which kind of I find very interesting and really odd because they have no choice here. Maybe we will see one of their RFAs here moved after all. So let me know your thoughts. How do the Lightning get themselves out of cap jail before the season starts? Now, as I mentioned as well, there's lots of UFAs still on the market that are unsigned, depending on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a scoring winger, you still have Mike Hoffman. You've got Anthony Duclair. You've got Granlund out there. You've got Andreas Athanasiou. You got some center icemen, like some veteran centers, like Derek Brassard. You've got Carl Soderberg out there. You've got Eric Howlett as well. You got another winger in Connor Sheary. So really a pretty good group there of decent scoring forwards that can be had for pretty cheap. If you look around some of the more recent contracts signed, there's quite a possibility outside of maybe Hoffman, and a lot of these contracts are going to be probably maybe $2-3 million, or in most cases probably even less than that. So it makes you wonder what is taking so long. There seems to be a lot of these players are somewhat in a holding pattern. Maybe they're unhappy with the offers. A lot of teams that are expressing interest are saying we need to wait because we need to find cap space. And the trade market is just kind of got clogged up there in a way. We went through quite a stretch of time where there was trades happening a lot and signings all the time, and now for what's left, it just seems to be kind of somewhat stuck. There's just not as much happening as there once was. I mean, there's still some pretty decent defensemen out there as well. You got Travis Hamonic, you got Sami Vatanen, you got Andy Green, who's rumored to go back to the Islanders again on a short-term deal. Like, they're another team that's in quite an awkward predicament when it comes to their cap situation. Also got Ben Hutton out there who's still unsigned, and another forward that I didn't mention was Corey Perry, who, even though he didn't have a great regular season in Dallas, he had a really solid playoff and was a huge part of their run to the Stanley Cup final. Now, in the case of the Dallas Stars, there's been a lot of reports as well that they are about to kind of furlough some workers again, and they're really struggling from a financial standpoint. Their owner, Tom Gagliardi, has a lot of business in the hospitality industry, and it's obviously suffering a lot due to the pandemic. And the Dallas Stars are a team who's one of the few who have actually been coming out and talking more about it. I seen an article today talking about how much money they've been losing, and right now they're a team that's not really up against the cap too bad, but if you look at their cap situation here, they have around $6 million or so in space, but they also need to sign Rupe Hintz and Dennis Gurianov. So if you take a look at what they're likely going to get paid, I would think that a return to Corey Perry to Dallas is probably pretty unlikely, as much as there probably would be interest, unless he's willing to sign even cheaper than before. Maybe, unless they find a way to maybe move out one player instead or something. Difficult to say since the trade market's so clogged up, but Corey Perry could very well find himself on another one-year contract with another type of contender. I think a Stanley Cup contender would be the ideal team for him, but obviously a lot of them out there are so tight on salary cap space. But when it comes to like some of these players, like Hamonic, for example, defenseman could end up back in Calgary. It's rumored he could be also heading to the Winnipeg Jets, and many of the other players are certainly kind of out there in limbo with not a ton of rumors around him. I know, like, for example, Duclair was a player that apparently had talks with Nashville. There was some wondering if either Hoffman or Duclair could return to Ottawa because they talked that they weren't quite done. They wanted to add another scoring forward as well. And obviously they both have ties there. I would think a Hoffman return would be a little bit less likely given the messy way he departed. I would think it would be more likely that Duclair returned, if any, or they go in a completely different direction here, or just maybe go the way of like an Athanasiou, for example, who's got a lot of speed and looking for a chance to rebound here. Maybe he could be their next project and a player they help bring back here. So we'll see what happens, but all kinds of players unsigned. Hopefully we get some news on these guys here in the coming days. That's all for tonight, so let me know your thoughts and opinions and everything discussed here today, and we'll discuss down in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.